ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits. It ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to the 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of hands-on cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your cyber hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Now for more Enterprise Security Weekly news, the non-AI edition, and that's the only time you'll hear me say that. Again, you can check out securityweekly.com/ESW392 if you want to follow along as we go through the news, or for links to what we're talking about, or any of my snarky commentary. Or Eamon's. Eamon has some commentary in there as well, and some articles. All right, where should we start here? I forgot to reorder the items here. So funding is actually number 9 on my list, but it should be number 1. So let's just start there. Fellow Security Weekly host Paul Asadorian, a company he works for, Eclipsium, raised $45 million, doing supply chain security there. And supply chain doesn't really, like, supply chain could mean a lot of things, right? Like, they're very focused on firmware security and low level code. So not to be confused with like Chain Guard supply chain or Endor Labs supply chain. You know, it's not SCA or anything like that. Maybe it generates SBOMs for you. I haven't seen the product in a while, but yeah, different part of the market.
I'm not surprised that there's funding available to solve this problem. I feel like I talk about the supply chain a lot, and I think this is, from my understanding, they address these little appliances and network devices and things like that are often
laptops, servers, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of things are, these things from a supply chain perspective, I think not only can they be compromised, but also some of the things are neglected, so not necessarily vulnerable when they show up at your door, but not always updated as frequently as they should. So I think supply chain is going to be something that we say enough to get sick of it ourselves this year as well, just because there seem to be a lot of high volume ways to ship things, and you really can't trace what you're buying back to where it came from anymore. I was writing something last night about how the SBOM is no longer going to be sufficient, but our whole infrastructure for delivering hardware, software, those types of things is so complex that I don't think anybody can realistically know where what they bought came from.
Yeah, and it's you're right. It's not enough. Like if we go back to like SolarWinds and Log4j and stuff like that, like it's not enough to know what's in your environment, but also what is normal for that thing. What external sites and IP addresses should SolarWinds have been hitting, and can I lock it down to that? If I can lock it down to that, do I even care about a backdoor being in it? Because the exploit would have to come from update.solarwinds.com, right? Because that's the only place it's allowed to go. And folks who had an easy time with Log4j had an easier time because they locked down outbound, traffic, outbound session creation. So the exploit could get in, but it couldn't create a connection back out. So yeah, we need behavioral as well as like the SBOM. We need to know behaviors also. And some of the SBOM efforts out there are actually going in that direction. I'm trying to remember It's like Cyclone DX, I think is the name of it. Has an extension to include behavior. So here's if this piece of software is doing anything that's not on this list, it ain't us. There's something going on.
Seems like something basic that would be, I guess, until you require companies to do it, they're not going to do it. But it
Yeah.
seems like a very basic thing to include.
Well, we're going to be facing an interesting era of regulation in the U.S. here over the next couple of years. And, SBOMs were one of those things that were a focus from the last administration, and there were executive orders and all kinds of frameworks. So it is a really hot space. I actually had a very wonderful call with a Gartner analyst yesterday, totally not on the topic I scheduled, but we ended up talking about this whole area. And SBOM is probably one of those things that's just going to be a CYA. Whether it stays or goes in terms of regulations, who the heck knows? The topic that shall not be named also being deregulated. But as far
Is
as
that how we get around it now?
yes, the topic that shall not be named. But as far as SBOMs go, it's not that hard. This is something we've actually sort of been doing for a very, very long time. We're just doing it in a slightly different way. And not only does it have to come with behaviors, because, yeah, that's important, but it has to come with dependencies, and it also has to come with risk tolerances. And that's where we get into the really interesting part of it all, because risk tolerances for different companies, different industries, even down to different CIOs, it has to be at that really customized level. But SBOM is basically going to be like, hey, if you're making a cake, you probably need some kind of flour. Now, it doesn't have to be, all-purpose flour. It can be your almond flour, your wheat flour, your gluten-free flour, your, whatever. Yes, I know there are flourless cakes, but
Are you hungry, Katie?
I'm always
Feeling
hungry.
hungry right now?
Always hungry. But the SBOM is going to be that basic foundation, and it's almost going to be like just the cost of doing business. Years ago, I think it was 2017, 2018 at RSA, Laura Ketzel gave a talk. Laura Ketzel from Forrester gave a talk on how risk is now going to be your company's currency. You're going to have to prove how trustworthy you are in terms of cybersecurity, attestation, audits, et cetera, et cetera. It hasn't quite come to that yet, but because we're at a little bit of an inflection point here, I think we are going to start to see companies holding one another accountable, whether or not we get more regulation, because I think in their case, it's more, we don't want to take on unnecessary risk. We don't want to be the one with our head on the chopping block if something goes wrong, and less of a, this is the right thing to do, but more of a CYA. So I do think we're going to see SBOM, but I don't see, some companies are trying to make it a standalone product, and it's not. It's not, and it shouldn't be. It should be that basic functionality that, if you're going to make a non-flourless cake, you've got to have flour in the cake. That's just what it is. And so you've got to have that SBOM, or an HBOM, quite frankly. It can't just be software bill of materials. We're talking about Eclipsium. And so you've got to have that lineage and that audit trail as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting what you said there about risk being the currency. I feel like it already is for most companies. Like, risk is something that you can spend to maybe grow faster. You can increase your risk. And take some risks that your competitors aren't to maybe get ahead. If you ratchet it down too much, then you're just going to get passed by all your competitors. Dropbox is still in business. They had 7 breaches in a very short time span. But they probably go, well, maybe not publicly, but it was probably worth it for them. Compared to, there was some like super secure competitors to Dropbox that didn't do so well. So I think that's a good way of putting it. Risk as a currency, but I think trust also is what you're talking about there. Like I think trust is more the piece that is harder to do without. If you don't build that trust, if you lie to your customers, you try and hide things from your customers. We saw it hit Uber real bad a number of years ago, to the point where they had to change out the exec team. They had to overhaul the company's image, the full thing, because it was super easy to just open up the Lyft app instead, because it worked almost identically.
But do you think the ramifications would have been as severe if Uber wasn't a company that served individual people? Because I think that's where enterprise stuff
B2B
becomes
versus B2C.
murky. Yeah, exactly. Like B2B,
Yeah,
people
you're
have
right.
such a short memory. And
Yeah.
I was like having a conversation with one of my friends a couple weeks ago about, enterprise security. And he was like, we live in an age of zero consequence. Like companies, B2B companies will have these massive breaches, but have you ever tried to move from Dropbox to another file sharing service? Like,
Too much friction.
unfortunately, inertia is a hell of a
CrowdStrike?
drug.
People like
Yeah.
CrowdStrike's done after they had that issue last year. I was like, what are you talking about?
Stock price is higher today than it was then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You
it's
go to Delta and switch from CrowdStrike to SentinelOne. Tell me how easy that is.
We talked about Fortinet last week. Fortinet's had several very dangerous breaches that they haven't disclosed, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And still, it's one of those things where it's like, you want to go swap out 1,000 little tiny boxes and ceilings? Go ahead. Go crawl around up in those little ceilings. And
Ivanti's still in business, right?
Okta. I mean, there's like, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
They're too big to fail.
Yeah. And so I think, where you don't have a public backlash, and there was a tiny rumble because we all live in this universe with the things like CrowdStrike and SolarWinds, but people, the general public, doesn't really see demonstrable harm from a lot of these things that actually do impact them at the end of the day. And so it's really hard to drive accountability absent regulation for B2B stuff, because nobody is personally impacted by it. So at the end of the day, do you really give a shit? You're going to go home and collect a paycheck from your company one way or the other. So, you're probably not going to spend a bunch of time to lobby, for accountability for one of your vendors.
And it's really tough, right? Like sometimes you can't even pinpoint, who should be accountable in a place. Like, we've got a stomach flu going through the house right now, and we don't know if it came from a food source, or if it came from going to the movies, or if it came from, because this kind of thing you could pick up off of surfaces. It could, something you touched, or it could have been something you ate or something you drank. Like, it's almost impossible to even pin down who should be responsible for that.
Yeah, there's so few accepted norms in security that we have things like the SOC 2, right? But that's just basically you telling people what you do, and most people don't read them. So there's we don't have the same concept of fiduciary duty, like securiduciary duty or something like that. So there is no you're required to be doing these things, and if you don't do these things, then you are at fault. And so you're right, it ends up being a pass the bag. The insurance companies ending up fighting it out to figure out whose cyber risk is going to cover it, and very little accountability, public or private, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a few other items here. Mitiga kind of strikes me as what I used to call a SIM for your SIM. So it's like an analytics vendor, that, you give access to your logs and events and stuff like that. It does more useful things with it than the company you already paid for to do, that's supposed to be doing the same thing. But they raised a Series B, and it looks like a lot of the value that comes out of it is the workflows that they enable. So they're not just doing detections. They've got investigation response workflows and investigation response automation. So maybe doing some recovery stuff as well. And they have managed services as well. So they're also in MDR. So they're doing a lot of stuff for a company that's just now raising a 30 million Series B. They've got a lot of products and services going on.
I think they're taking advantage of the fact that SIM is like this never-ending treadmill of dread, right? Because tuning your SIM, so if you can automate the tuning of your SIM with workflows, with all of these things, it takes a massive amount of potential risk off of the table. Because tuning your SIM is kind of like trying to tune your engine while you're in the middle of a drag race. You can't
Mhm.
stop. You can't pull over. Like, security work doesn't stop. So unless you're going to stand up, two SIMs next to each other and try to do it on a test one while the live, it's really impossible. If you don't deploy a SIM the correct way right out the gate, you're kind of screwed from Jump Street. So I
Yeah.
could see value in this. And there's no security team I know who's like, what we don't do is get enough useless alerts or have enough things to triage in a day. So yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot of pieces of, we have this is kind of, I think, the direction XDR was trying to go as well, is take all these little SIM stuff that can be automated and kind of automate some of that stuff. So there's certainly, I think, low risk, low value activities that the SIM for the SIM could probably
And
be dealing with.
yeah, I think the struggle here, like this is obviously focused on one use case, like XDR. It's focused on detecting and responding to attacks. But there's a lot of use cases for SIM. There's a lot of compliance use cases. Investigative stuff. Root cause analysis. Just for IT, like not even security related. So I think that's one of the challenges here, and seeing more and more companies move to more of a decentralized model where all the data sits in a place and then you can kind of in a modular fashion slap on some different stuff on top of it and use that data usefully without having to send copies of that data to a bunch of different data stores for each different use case, right?
Yeah, the data at the
So
center
also,
architecture is definitely preferable to the data running around in circles.
yeah. So a few more things here, and we'll get out of the finance stuff. So Luxembourg has a password, or there's a Luxembourg-based company with a password management tool. Passbolt. There's a ton of these tools already out there, but I'm mentioning this one because it's fully open source. So they're very committed to keeping all parts of it, including the commercial version of it, open source. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I guess I'd expect something a little different to come out of Luxembourg, which is kind of the home of like all the privacy legislation stuff that we see come out of the EU. So interesting to see that. And that was a Series A that they raised. And then F-Secure, which split itself into consumer and business, B2C and B2B a couple of years ago. The consumer one's still called F-Secure. The B2B company is called With Secure. And that B2B side of it, With Secure, sold off its cybersecurity consulting business, which we see happen all the time. We see product companies that don't have consulting, create it or acquire it and then go in the other direction. So, kind of a strategic business thing, depending on what you're trying to do with the business, I guess. All right. And if there's no comments on any of that stuff, we can jump into any of the other stuff here. We even have a dumpster fire and one labeled drama.
Ooh, let's go for drama.
You want to go for drama?
Let's go for drama. Why not?
So Semgrep changed their license, and there are a lot of details here, and you're not going to get the fully correct version from me because there's a lot going on. I feel like I don't fully understand it. So do check out this link from Josh Grossman, and there's other people with takes on this as well on LinkedIn and other places. But basically, they had competitors using Semgrep rules, and maybe they didn't want them to use the rules or whatever. Or I think part of it is the license didn't allow competitors to use them in the first place, but they weren't really enforcing it. And now they've chosen to start enforcing it. And so a lot of other vendors got kind of huffy and started something called OpenGrep. So there's this kind of multi-company fork of Semgrep called OpenGrep. To me, I've seen a lot of this stuff kind of come and go that feels to me, and this kind of smacks like some of these others that I've seen, like a marketing campaign. And I kind of doubt that we'll see OpenGrep really go anywhere. Like a year or two from now, I wouldn't be surprised to see the domain wasn't renewed and it just expired, and now GoDaddy owns it and it has it parked or something like that. Because that's what I've seen in a lot of these other cases where a bunch of competitors come together and collaborate, and paint another vendor as evil or whatever. And I've talked to a lot of people behind the scenes who are Semgrep customers, who work at Semgrep, who work at competitors, and the general gist seems to be like there's no villain here. Like this is just a bunch of whining from the competitors. So that's the story I've heard. This isn't a space I'm hugely invested in or know a ton about. So those are my disclaimers. But yeah, I think this will gloss over pretty quickly.
Yeah, this came about a little bit ago. We talked about it internally because at one time my company's platform relied on Semgrep and moved away from it a couple of years ago, building our own internal language instead. And part of the reason for that was that, first of all, we didn't necessarily want to or need to rely on an external tool. The idea was, build your own tool to ensure accuracy and greater context, et cetera, et cetera. And these tools they're commoditized now, right? So it's not like what's being taken away is leaving this major gap or this major hole in the market, right? So there are a lot of other options. Some of them are open source, some of them are part of other products. So I don't see this being a big thing. I believe that competing products must have them out by tomorrow, right? Tomorrow's the 31st. So probably most vendors have moved over if they were using them, if it was a competing product or a perceived competitor. But because this is in our space, we were aware of it a while back. And the fact of the matter is it didn't change anything. We didn't have, as far as I know, a single customer call or concern about, oh my goodness, this is a huge, huge change in the market. So not really a lot of drama. Sorry, folks.
I don't know. I need to. I'm kind of catching up on this one, but it seems very similar to what happened with Terraform, and when they updated their license and then caused open tofu. So there was that. I don't know. I think there's a lot of people that use Semgrep. There's a lot of companies that use Semgrep in their like workflow. So like they're like an augmented. I know personally of a company that will fix things, but in any case, yeah, I'm curious. I think when a company has something that's open source and then people start using it commercially, they have to update the license and then whatnot. So yeah, I'm TBD, I guess, is my
it's a tough balance. For folks that missed it, we had a good conversation about this with the CEO and founder of OpenVPN. So it was an interesting conversation there, and yeah, it's just there are pros and cons of building your company around open source. So check out that conversation that we had. From drama to dumpster fires. So I characterize this as a dumpster fire because it just seems ridiculous to me. Like there are Linux distributions having their accounts blocked and banned for mentioning Linux because Linux is now associated as a threat or something. And of course, Meta is using AI to moderate stuff, and that's working out really well.
Yeah, well, when YouTube used to ban, security topics, anybody remember that? Like that was a mess. And people are still afraid of getting banned from YouTube. But this is ridiculous. So I don't know.
Facebook was just not moderating at all.
Yeah, right.
And DistroWatch points out some irony at play here. Facebook runs most of its infrastructure on Linux and often posts job ads looking for Linux developers. How does that work? We can't hire people because our own platform banned us for
And you
mentioning the
almost wonder if
technology
this
that
is
we're
some weird like security rule run amok or something like that. Somebody wrote like some type of detection to try to detect like
yeah,
code injection through posts or something like that. And
yeah,
all of a sudden it's just, somebody
happens
thought they
all
were
the
doing a
time.
really good thing
Yeah.
and their lucky performance review's
Yeah, you can
over.
throw tech terms into things and get them blocked and get them banned. And like I remember years ago, Microsoft Update got blocked by WebSense. And it was only for like 8 hours, but it caused havoc, caused chaos.
I wonder. I sometimes wonder if
Is there
someone's trying
malware
to.
coming from? Why did Microsoft get blocked?
Yeah. I always wonder if this, like, along what Jackie was saying, like someone's trying to troll us or gaslight us. It's just someone internally is like, yeah, let's just mess them up.
And speaking of Microsoft, Eamon,
Oh, oh,
so there are some crazy vulnerabilities. Like I keep reading about these vulnerabilities. I'm like, how in
oh,
2024, 2025 are we seeing these late 90s, early 2000s level vulnerabilities?
oh my God! Like, don't get me. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and like my the face, the things I'm seeing. So I mean, if you just read the abstract, so what you're talking about is like the MFA bypass on Microsoft. And listen to the summary. The bypass was simple. It took around an hour to execute, required no user interaction, and did not generate any notification or provide the account holder with any indication of trouble. Like, wow.
And they're throwing hundreds of thousands of auth attempts at this thing.
Yeah.
Basically they're brute forcing the 6-digit TOTP,
Yeah.
and it works. Because Microsoft was letting them. There was no rate limiting on that. Like there was rate limiting on the session, but you could regenerate the session. Like I think the rate limit was like 9 or 10 or something like that. And all they did is just understood the auth flow really well, and just found a complete gap in there. In Microsoft's biggest authentication, uh, you know, uh, um, exposed authentication mechanism for their biggest product, which is 365.
And it's not the first time that their authentication platform had an issue, right? With
Like
Teams
it's probably
before.
the most used business SaaS product in the world.
But there was a very big glaring issue, I think, a year or two ago, and it was just like jaw dropping that it was in their OWASP session. I need to refresh my history, but
Oh, was
like
that the unhashed session token that was being passed?
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But like, give me a break. I mean, of course, if this gets exploited, it's a sophisticated attacker. Yeah, give me a break.
Well, this is the same
Yeah.
company that their data scientists accidentally pulled full machine or pushed full machine backups to their public GitHub with like, hey, look at these cool models we built. And it had a
Yeah,
lot
they
of
didn't
stuff in it.
understand how to use Azure buckets correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
They thought they were publishing a file, but they were publishing the entire buckets. And for whatever freaking reason, their unencrypted PC backups were in the same bucket as their AI models.
Face palm, face palm. Like, give me a
Like
break.
not understanding how to use your own company's product. That's pretty bad. Not organizing your stuff well. Like why are your PC backups in the same place as your AI work product? Like, get your shit
because
together.
they can be.
Yeah.
Get your shit together.
I have to say, I used
That was
to.
work directory when it said, "Where do you want to save your backup?" Oh, just the same place I've saved everything else today, I guess.
Like basic mistakes. I used to, yeah. I don't know. My opinion is changing. I used to have a lot of respect for Microsoft because of all the security research they've done all the years. But like, what is going on over here? Like,
This
Well,
is not the same.
I think that raises the whole question we were talking about last week about systemically important technology companies and who's watching these companies and holding them to the standard they should be held to, given the damage that can, come out of one of them screwing
Yeah.
something up, being breached, and it's not all companies are created equal. And if Microsoft can't get their shit together for cross-discipline training, then I hate to say regulation, but there needs to be some type of watchdog, right? Who is on top of these companies, making sure that these things can't
Like the
happen.
CSRB. Oh, wait. You're gone now.
It's gone. Yeah. Yep.
Ouch.
I have to talk about that one tomorrow.
In other news of vulnerabilities that shouldn't have happened, it was possible to take over any Subaru, millions of Subarus over the internet, just like in very similar ways that the Nissan Leaf was vulnerable 9 years ago, and in the same ways that GM cars were vulnerable when Charlie Miller and Chris Velasek did that stunt hacking with Andy Greenberg at Wired 9.5 years ago. So we're not learning from lessons here. Companies are not learning from previous failures, and that's a problem.
And what's more, there is no self-accountability. I mean, it's not, or not even self-accountability, customer accountability. It's almost like if you were a doctor and you didn't care if you killed your patients. I mean,
oops.
That's what malpractice insurance is for, lady.
It is. But I can tell you, my father was a doctor, and at the end of his career, he was paid. So he had a private practice for a few decades, and then he went into ER. And part of the reason was because malpractice insurance was literally eating into, being able to pay for a house, being able to, afford food, clothing, etc. This is going back years now because my father's 81. It was costing him over $100,000 a year for malpractice insurance. And he could be sued for quite literally anything. Mm-hmm. And he was frequently, very, very frequently sued for things that had nothing to do with him, right? Yeah. All the time. And I'm trying not to get worked up. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. But the reality... I
just mean in the sense that these large companies, even if they were sued by dozens of... they don't... There's no billions of dollars that they're going to settle for that's going to impact Ford or GM or Toyota.
They just don't care. They don't care. And the consumers don't care because they keep coming back. Like Microsoft is quite literally one of the biggest security companies in the world. And they keep, for a long time, they're a big company, big target on their back. More people are going after them. Yeah, that's true. But you have a responsibility. You have a corporate responsibility, you have a social responsibility, you have a responsibility, not just to your shareholders, as you said.
Legally,
before,
that's their top priority.
I understand, but this is not what it should be. And it's bad. Why we talk about we don't get enough respect in cybersecurity. We talk about how we don't really have a seat at the table. There's been talk lately about CISOs who are being fired or demoted, or companies that are getting rid of their CISO because, not enough respect. Wow. Let's complain about it. Well, this is why. When we keep having fundamental problems, we're going to keep being seen as the class clown. And I know I talk about it a lot. I'm sorry. I guess I'm still a newlywed after 1.5 years, but my husband works in construction. He builds houses. If he built a house and it fell down on someone, what would happen to him?
Well, Hammurabi's code, he'd be put to death, I think.
I don't think he would be put to death, but he would certainly not be.
Early on.
That's a really good example, though, right? I live in this massive subdivision, and this massive subdivision was built by 3 massive national builders, Lennar, D.R. Horton, and one other, I can't remember. And we have had dozens of houses in a 3-mile radius of where I am. Their electrical planners just into flames, right? We've had houses almost burned down. I just had an electrician here last week because these houses were all built as quickly and as profitably as possible. Because if you work in a small company, and you will feel the direct impact of your, if your husband is directly responsible. But what if your husband built the house as part of a massive company, and when it fell down 3 weeks later, he was already in a different state building houses? And that's where we're at with Microsoft, is like, with all these companies, with Subaru,
Yes.
it's not that they don't care. It's that everything in a business comes down to dollars and cents. How many people
So they
die?
don't care.
What do we have to pay for those lives
I'm
versus
sorry.
what's it actually going to cost to fix the problem? And I fully agree with you that it is not moral. And this is why we were having this conversation about OpenVPN last week, is that we have been okay for 180 years with any company can be publicly traded. Any company can put profits before every other mandate they have. And that's where things need to change, is that legally Microsoft's obligation is to only provide as much security as is profitable.
And that's just not okay. It's like we were talking about with data. When we stop worrying so much about the cost of data, the cost of fixing a breach, the cost of, thank goodness, knock on wood, I've never had my identity stolen. I know people who have, and it's disastrous. The number of people who have, in comparison to the rest of us, is thankfully very small. But when you look at it and how horrific it is for them, and it's not like, I'm not saying security is the easiest thing in the world, but let's face it, guys, it's not the hardest job in the world either. There's a whole spectrum here, and we just have to do better. And if we want to be taken more seriously, we have to do better. And we have to find ways to make our tools so they actually solve problems. There's a huge issue. I'm probably never getting another job again, but there's a huge issue in our industry where we start companies so we can sell companies. We start companies so the founders can make millions and millions of dollars, and the rank and file can make, 20 to 50,000 perhaps. That's like, if you want to do that, fucking go work on Wall Street. Pardon me, bleep me out if you need to. Like, go work on Wall Street. Don't go into an industry. It's just like if you went into medicine because you thought, I'm going to be rich, and you didn't care about people. Oh, doctor, I have a bellyache. Okay, that's nice. Take a cough drop. Like, if you don't care, go into something where you don't have to care.
But there's money to be made, Katie. There's money to be made.
Yeah, it's like when your annual revenue is 3% of the US GDP, nobody's telling you anything.
It's just
that's the problem, right? Is that no single country can really do anything about any of these multinational companies because they have so much power. So I fully agree. It's a moral issue.
If you've got the money, why can't you do better? Why can't you commit to doing better?
The shareholders want dividends.
Well, yeah, it's like, are you going to take a 2% haircut in your 401k because your mutual funds hold Microsoft and Microsoft decided to do better? Like, you might, because you're in security and you understand that. But the reality is none of these publicly traded companies are going to go out in their quarterly earnings and be like, oh, and by the way, for next quarter, we're really going to do the right thing. So we're going to have massive losses because we're going to invest in doing the right thing. Like, nobody wants to pay the price of that.
Yeah, they're not incentivized.
In their hedge funds.
I get it. But the people who are empowered to make those decisions aren't the ones who get hurt, aren't the ones who get hit. And there are casualties. It's not like a house falling down on your head, or it's not like you have some foreign object embedded in your body that somebody refuses to take out and you die of sepsis. But like, I get it. It's not that extreme. But why can't we just focus on the right things? I spend 9 to 10 hours every day at my job. If I didn't care about it and doing the right thing, I think I'd become brain dead. I think I'd just melt into a puddle of muck right here. Like, why can't people commit to trying to do just a little bit better? And realistically, every time Microsoft screws up, they have to pay this fine or that fine or that remediation fee, or pay some external PR firms and comms firms, blah, blah, blah. So it's not like they're not losing any money. You could make the argument that they could take that money, reinvest it in doing the right thing.
Yeah, but it's all a numbers game. And the money that they may be losing doing that is a fraction of what it would cost to fix the problem.
The way to do it is to do what Germany did and say, you know what? nobody in the education system here is allowed to use Microsoft anymore. Nobody in the public government here is allowed to use Microsoft anymore because they are just not secure enough. That's what Germany did, but unfortunately, not everybody is willing to do that.
And they can't use Linux either because they're going to get banned from Facebook. So now Germany's got no choice but to use Apple.
I guess you would need, I guess you do need some state to step up, or some customer, large enough customer, to step up and say, hey, if you're going to have basic flaws like this, we're going to fine you or something. You know what I mean? Or give us a really, really, really deep discount. And the same with privacy. I mean, if we go back to the Subaru article, I think more than just controlling the car, which is bad, they attackers were able to access at least a year of cars' location histories. And guess what? Subaru employees still can access location histories.
And like lots of Subaru employees, not like a special group of a dozen of them.
Wow.
Like lots and lots of Subaru employees can look at your daily commute and
Yikes.
Everywhere you go to drop off your kid, to do your chores. Yeah.
I was going to joke about how it's Subaru. So they're like, well, we're all privileged, so we all should have access. Sorry.
So I'm not moving from my 2011 car anytime soon, as long as this stuff is going on. Like
I have a new car and it's been a nightmare. Like it's been so frustrating. And it's stuff that I'm like, just take it out because I don't use it and I don't care about it. And I don't want
it's stuff they use to sell the car. Mm-hmm. It's stuff they use to market and sell the car, but a lot of people just never use it. Like my 2011 BMW had some connected features, but by the time I got it, like literally the domain names and the DNS no longer exist for those services.
Wow.
So I've got buttons and switches in my car that literally do nothing. Like one of them is like you have to open the plastic plate like you're going to launch a missile, and there's a big red button for like emergency contact or something. That does nothing now. I can't remap it to something else. It's just functionality in the car that was required some subscription at some point, and after 7 or 8 years, they shut down that. It's no longer compatible because they've moved on to like new services and stuff, and they've rebuilt everything, and they just shut it down. So yeah, it's making cars more disposable, which makes me very angry. Not a big fan of that.
That's the whole part. Like I said, I did just get a new car, and the first thing I did, they always want to take you walk through your car when you get a car. First thing I did is hit factory reboot. And my salesman was like, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm resetting all this data.
I don't want everyone else's Bluetooth.
He said, well, the car only has 10 miles on it. I said, I don't care. Reboot. I'm not stupid enough to think that people don't have access to stuff. But several years ago, my refrigerator started making noises on July 4th. Of course, it was July 4th, right? And I did find a repair person to come out and fix it because it was a chip. It was a microchip that was malfunctioning in my refrigerator. I don't have a smart fridge, but yet there was a malfunctioning microchip. And he's like, wow, how old is this fridge? I said, it's 3 years old. I just bought the house and they bought it 2 years ago. I've got the paperwork from when they bought it. And he's like, wow, I'm surprised this is lasting this long. I'm like, 3 years?
Wow.
So I grew up with the same fridge in my parents' house for whatever it was, 17, 18
Decades.
years, and there was no problem. They don't make things to last anymore. And part of the reason is it's a lot easier to swap out the technology in a new product, to build it into the new product.
That's what's driving sales now. Yeah.
It's just it, but like literally your car, your refrigerator, your
planned
laundry.
Obsolescence. Yay, capitalism.
I'm coming off as this like massive hippie granola person, and I'm just not. I'm not really.
No, you're coming off as somebody who's going to live longer than the next 10 years, which is more than what we can say for most of the people making the laws about these things. And if you're only, if you only give a shit about the next
they're
2
not
years,
going to have to live with their decisions.
If you don't have to care about your next congressional term or your next earnings release, you're not making super great long-term decisions, right? So like, that's why everything in your house is now made out of freaking some polyethyl something gas derivative, and when your house burns,
Yeah.
it gives the firefighters who come to put it out cancer. Nobody cares because nobody's making long-term decisions. And this is where China is going to whoop the US's ass, is because China thinks in 1,000-year dynasties, not in 2-year congressional terms. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would love
know-
to see the US get to a place where we can make really great long-term decisions for the benefit of humans and the environment. That's
Well, most people are really excited that TikTok is back. So I guess we're starting to think like China.
Oh, temporarily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eamon. Go ahead, Eamon.
Jackie, that's a really good point. I got two things on that. One, I try to teach my kids some of these things. Like, think 100 years ahead. The decisions you make, think 100 years ahead, because I was only thinking like 5 years or even less. But what's interesting is, from a security perspective, that's how we're thinking, right? Or at least that's how leadership is. Like,
Yep.
it's funny.
A
Like
year
when
at
I,
a time. Yeah.
yeah, months for startups. It's like
Yeah.
this quarter, like, hey, we need to put video cameras on our entrance. Why? I'm like, what do you mean why? Oh, so unless it's like gonna make the business survive or whatever. My point is that, like, we security people suffer when we work with let's see, how do I say this nicely? But like, some security people, because we're only asked to fix the problem now. We're not asked to fix like what's going to be like a problem in a year or 2 years. So I think that's a really good point, and we in the security industry deal with this often. It's wild.
Yeah. So we got to wrap up here. One other vulnerability we didn't get to talk about, where apparently sending a couple packets could take down cell connectivity for entire cities. So that's fun. It reminds me of Loft testifying to Congress that they could take down the whole internet in about 30 minutes back in 1997, 1998. I forget exactly when that was. So yeah, that completes our trifecta of vulnerabilities that should never have happened, because we knew about this stuff long, long, long ago. Story number 8 is an essay from Katie Teitler, but I feel like, Katie, your rant earlier covered some of this, so we're going to skip it.
Yeah, go ahead. It's a lot milder than I wrote
Check it
in my
out.
head.
Definitely go read it. It's about how we can finally be sure regulations won't fix cybersecurity. So it's kind of like part 2 of the rant that you had earlier. Because your rant is, things are bad. How do we incentivize companies to do the right thing? I think naturally the first place you reach for is regulations, and that's where your essay comes in. So good lead in for people to check that out. And then that brings me to our squirrel story, which is both, I described as hilarious and concerning, where apparently you can create fake commit Git histories on anybody's GitHub. So they make a little graph of when you've checked in code, and because you can fake the history, so it's a time graph, right? Where it's got day of the week on the x-axis and then the month on the y-axis, and you can use it to do pixel art by faking the dates. So you can either hilariously just like spray painting on somebody's Git history, or you can abuse the hell out of it, and terrorize somebody. So that's not great.
Yeah, there's a few things that GitHub like just can't or won't fix, and this is, it's just the data you just send out there can be anything. But the same with there was that issue that someone mentioned late last year, where if you have a fork, I can't remember the exploit. Do you remember this? Where if someone had contributed to if you fork a repo, and then take the repo off, something like that. I'm going to butcher it, but it was pretty bad. Like, basically,
to like erase something of theirs.
You can, I think it was resulting in a contribute. I don't know. I'm messing it up, but it had to do with a fork. And if you, if a repo was public and then you made it private, they still had some sort of weird access. I can't remember.
Okay.
I'm butchering it. I'm doing a horrible job. But
I don't recall that. But but yeah, I mean, that's at GitHub is the world's code repo. So, kind of concerning when we see issues like this, because they scale to a whole lot of stuff. And we didn't cover any of your stuff, Eamon.
What did I have? Yeah, let's see here.
I'm just now noticing that. I'm not used to other hosts putting in stories. I'm sorry.
I don't know if I should.
I was like, oh no, was there homework I didn't do?
One of them is overlap. I think your number 2 is the same as my.
I realized that. Yeah, I just saw
number
that, yeah.
5. Yeah, ransacked. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same. Send 2 packets, take down, sell access for a city. Then you had a Mastercard DNS error that went unnoticed for years. So basically, like a typo. And somebody actually registered the typo domain. These are always crazy. Like I've known people who have, like a friend of mine actually went out and registered like xxxx.xxx because it's used as an example in lots of coding exercises, and found there's tons of mail going to it. So these are always entertaining. So that's a good one. And then Qubes, I've been meaning to install Qubes for a long time. I remember following Joanna Rakowska earlier in her career. She stepped out of it at this point. She's no longer actively involved with running Qubes. And it's a really neat OS. Like it's kind of like a design experiment where you can segregate everything. So think like how the iPhone separates everything between apps on a phone, except you control it and configure it. So you can decide, okay, this cube is all my banking stuff. Maybe that includes a spreadsheet, a web browser, so different apps, different data. And then you can create as many of those as you want. And they're color coded by like the window. So all the red apps are your banking stuff. All the green stuff is maybe your coding stuff. And you can kind of logically create different parts of your operating system that can't communicate with each other. You can't copy and paste between red and green, but you can between green and green, right? So kind of a neat idea, but it only ran on like 4 different models of ThinkPad for a long time, but it's open wide up and you can install it on all kinds of stuff. And I've got a 5th gen X1 Carbon that I'm going to throw it on here at some point.
I love this idea. And I think, I also really like the company Island that has the secure browser, which is kind of like the browser version of this, where it's like everything is kind of contained. I think this is probably one of the only ways we're going to achieve security within the enterprise, right? Because one of the things that we really don't do is control how people create and duplicate data. We have great ways to see if people are downloading stuff they shouldn't have access to, but some companies are implementing, either you can't take a screenshot, but you can literally take a screenshot where you take a picture of a screen with your phone. And there's just all these things that we don't necessarily do to keep people from being able to spread or replicate data that I think will really be helped by these kind of more sanitized versions of things. I do this manually. I have 3 cell phones, right? So I have the phone that I keep all of my work stuff on. I have my personal phone that has all my crap on it. And then I have this is a hot new app and I'm going to install it on
the F around and find out phone.
I have a throwaway. Yeah, I have a burner phone. So, I think a lot of security people are already kind of doing this. I have 3 MacBooks. One of them's new. The other 2 are older, but have been repurposed for FAFOing. So I really love this idea and I hope that it gets traction.
Yeah. And then the last one here, Eamon, if you want to take us out with your turn no into a conversation essay.
Yeah. This one was it was kind of interesting. Actually, the format is in audio. I tried something different, but the idea is that, like, as security people, we deal with pushback all the time, and in this case, what can we do to help the other side come to the same consensus as us? And some people have a thing. A friend of mine mentioned this, where what needs to be true for this to happen. Or what happens if we don't do this? Or what are we prioritizing by not doing XYZ, right? Or being a little more, I don't want to say forceful, but like, again, because what we want is challenge. Yeah, what we want is people to be internally motivated, not relying on us to externally motivate. Our job is to educate them, but we kind of have to try to convince them as well. And oh, what will your customers think if they find out that you haven't done XYZ, right? What would your board think? What is our responsibility?
Katie,
Say again?
what would Katie think?
What would Katie think? We care. It's
Nobody
so
actually
important.
cares what I think. It's okay.
Yeah. So that's the idea, is like, when someone comes back to you, say, why do we need to do this now? And say, why should we not do this? Right. That's the idea where I was going with that.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it's we've been kind of dancing around this today on the podcast, and yeah, I think it comes back to thinking about those outcomes, and helping them see your perspective, but also, I think security folks lack that perspective as well, to a great extent, and sometimes we ask for too much, and it's we have to be a little bit more choosy about the hills that we're willing to die on.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of energy, I have to say. A lot of times we'll just get upset. It's like, oh, these guys, why are they doing this? But if we can wrangle our emotional intelligence a little bit,
You're gonna
and
regret this, and then they never do. They're like,
yeah, anyway.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, Katie, Eamon, for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun. I did a great job keeping both news segments down to 30 minutes or less. I just want to pat myself on the back for that.
Oops.
Again, that was sarcasm for folks that need the sarcasm flag. And a big thanks to
Play it
everyone
on
watching.
1.25 speed. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Big thanks to everyone for watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. The thing we did do a good job is not saying the thing that shall not be named on this second segment. I think we held up our end of the bargain on that.
Nice. Everybody give yourself a golf clap. Yep.
And next week, we'll be talking to Aaron Painter about the evolving risks of deepfakes and identity verification, and John Dwyer about insights from catching an APT attack in action. So he works at an MSSP, and this is a very interesting story. So, urge you to check that one out when that comes out. See you then. Bye-bye.